The Tower of Babel, or the events in the time of Nimrod, was not just events that could have happened any time in history. The ancient peoples, but a certain way of understanding, a certain kind of cosmic code in the starry heavens.
Somehow, some way, influence of the giants, because it's going to have to be the same. So that there'll be maybe an age when their fallen angels are walking amongst us again, just as it was in the days of Noah. These beast empires come from the bloodlines of these dynastic giant kingdoms.
And according to the way that I understand the book of Revelation, there's a lot of imagery that is clearly taken from the Nephilim.
There are Nephilim or Rephaim genealogical bloodlines that are in place. These are 10 emperors or 10 kings of the world, so they have to rise yet.
These people who believe that they are from the Nephilim, who are they today? Why is this important?
How do you establish when the fig tree generation is that Jesus is talking about? There's 10 kings of Atlantis that ruled before the flood that were trying to create a world government.
They look at the United Nations and how maybe the Antichrist is going to come from them, from Europe.
To reincarnate these gods and father the Nephilim, I believe that the European Union will play a very important role in that.
How far away do you think we are from this, and why? Dr. Willem McLoud, Gary Wayne, welcome, gentlemen.
Well, thank you for inviting us back.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward, and I believe it will be a very interesting discussion.
Willem, I'll give this to you first, and then we'll go to Gary.
Okay. So in my books, I argue that there's something called a cosmic code. And I believe that the Tower of Babel, or the events in the time of Nimrod, was not just events that could have happened any time in history. They aligned it with a particular period in the history of the world where the starry heavens were aligned in a certain way. So it seems to me that the ancient peoples had a certain way, not astrology, but a certain way of understanding a certain kind of cosmic code in the starry heavens. We find it in the Bible. For example, we read that the heavens is like a scroll. It's compared with a scroll. We find that in the book of Isaiah and in the book of Revelation. And we also read about the Magi, who was able to determine that Jesus was the Messiah and where he would be born. So I believe there was an ancient tradition, and that in certain circles, the knowledge about this particular code was kept alive. So the Uruk period, let me just give an example. I've already mentioned the Pleiades, the 7 gods.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting about the period that we're talking about, what happened at the Tower of Babel, is that it was exactly during this period that these stars, the Pleiades, and they closely observed the Pleiades. That's very important. The raining season fell at the time of the rising of the Pleiades. So they observed the rising of Pleiades, and that was also determining the season for sowing.
Yeah.
So what happened was, because of the precession of the equinoxes, slowly but steadily, on the horizon, at the same point, the Pleiades moved north from a position underneath the equator to a position on top, just above that. So that is very, very, very important, because for them it meant something. It meant to them that the Pleiades, the 7 gods, was the area underneath in the celestial skies. They understood that as being hidden, not yet above the ground, not yet in this world. Remember, they had this idea of that was paired with with key with the earth. So these gods were born on the earth. Ninsun is equated with the earth. So them arising or like plants or seed from the earth. This is actually the picture here. So it moved from just beneath to just above the equator. And so that for them meant it went from under the ground to become visible on the ground, to be born into this world. So the seven gods were born into the world when the Pleiades slowly but steadily moved from a position just to the south of the celestial equator to a position just above the equator. So this is might be a lot of technical details, but I have a long description and discussion of that in my first volume. So I believe that these things doesn't happen at any time. I don't believe that the time of the Nephilim will just be something that will happen just at any possible time in future. So I believe there's a certain code and there's a certain time when these things will arrive. And in my view, we are not yet there. So I believe that there's still some time before that will happen. And if I just look at Bible prophecy and I observe the world situation, then I also come to the same conclusion that it will take some time before the end times arrive. And according to the way that I understand the book of Revelation, there's a lot of imagery that is clearly taken from the Nephilim. And so I believe there's a certain kind of return of the Nephilim in end times, but I don't believe we are yet there. I don't believe it'll be in our lifetimes, but it is definitely slowly but steadily approaching. So when it will be, I have a long discussion of that in my third volume, but it's too technical to discuss here. But I believe there's a time, a determined time when these things will happen. And I believe it still lies in the future.
All right. Gary?
Yeah, prophecy is always a terrific topic. So, but we need to understand, and just as Willem is talking about, is that the polytheist cultures have their prophecies as well, but it comes from a polytheist lens, not a monotheist lens, and it's going to have a different outcome. And so that's what really makes it important to understand and try and understand how the timings of those sort of kind of coordinate. So they believe these types of destructions come in cycles, water and fire. And the age of fire begins in the age of Aquarius, which started in 2012 and calculated through celestial precession. But those ages are like 2,360 years, as I recall, so long periods of time. But it's sometime in the age of Aquarius that this destruction is going to be coming. And so we're in that age now. So, and in the polytheist side, they're looking and celebrating this year the first jubilee of 25 years of this century, and this would be the age of Mithra. Mithra was a god of the Zoroastrians, for example, and Mitra without the H, and Mithra was also the god of Mithraism, that was partial of the merging of imageries and dates and things with Christianity by Constantine, unfortunately. But nonetheless, it's a term that's used for the end time Antichrist in Gnosticism called Lord Maitreya. It's taken out of the subcontinent of India tradition. And Mitra means a bond or alliance, just as Antichrist in Daniel 9:27 will create the covenant of death for the last 7 years when it comes about.
Yeah.
And so this is the period of time where Alice Bailey talked about in the Gnosticism time of starting in 2025, when there will be an externalization of the hierarchy of the invisible ones, so that there'll be maybe an age when the fallen angels are walking amongst us again, just as it was in the days of Noah. Now, their writings don't say it happens as the end time starting in 2025. It's just the time where you can look for an entrance of this Lord Maitreya. And whether it's a Mahdi of the Sunni or the Shia, Lord Maitreya, the new Buddha, Antichrist, there's a term for this individual all around the world. So are we biblically in that kind of nexus point that some of the polytheist understandings might have? And we might be. I'm certainly open to that possibility, but how do you establish when the fig tree generation is that Jesus is talking about in one of the overarching signs, along with the days of Noah, along with the sorrows, to understand the chronology of events that he provides for us in sequential order in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and 21? What's the fig tree generation? There's prophetic language that's used for Israel in the Old Testament, one for the northern kingdom, one for the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is the vine, the southern kingdom is the fig or the fig tree. And passages in Isaiah, Hosea, Jeremiah, and others will detail where some of these examples are used. So now roll to a time just before Jesus gives his Olivet timing of his coming back, when the disciples are legitimately disturbed and want to know what's going to be happening, to just before that, and just before he goes into the temple and gives the prophecy of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, because they're about to betray and violate the covenant, which brings about the diaspora curses of the covenant set down in the Holy Covenant in the Old Testament. What he does, he goes up to a fig tree and then says, this fig tree no longer bears fruit. And then we get the sequence of events that are going to happen after. And it's just before the betrayal of him and the violation of the covenant. So he begins telling the people of the southern kingdom and the disciples who are all Jewish, they understand who the fig tree is. So they're becoming increasingly concerned. So they ask for the chronology of events. And so when you see that fig tree in season, that's the generation where all of the events that he talks about will happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. So we have the southern kingdom back in the covenant land. The northern tribes are yet to be awakened, so that's still to happen. If it is that fig tree allegory, then when is the start of the fig tree generation? Well, we have independence declared in 1947, the war in 1948 in Israel. But Jerusalem is also an epicenter for end time prophecy, biblically. And so they get control of that in 1967. So if you were to speculate and say what would be the start of that generation, I would lean more towards 1967 if we're in that fig tree generation. Now, how long is a generation? Well, we're told 40 years in the wilderness. We're told 70 years in the book of Psalms. And you could also probably even plug in an 80-year there. We're told 120 years in Genesis 6:3. So we don't know exactly when that generation, the length of that generation, but sometime in a generation, if 1967 is the start. So if we are in the end time, we are in the sorrows and the birth pangs, where those catastrophes will get stronger and start working together. They are earthquakes, they are pestilence, they are famine, and wars and rumors of war. And it's those birth pangs that will set up the end time scenario. And the end time scenario also requires the Babylon religion to come along, the universal religion, which we haven't seen yet. So that's a big stumbling block. And you need that Babylon religion because in the covenant in Daniel 9:27, Israel, as in Judah, as we understand them today, southern kingdom, will be permitted to start their sacrifices again on a wing or an overspreading of the temple for the first 3.5 years. Well, Islam is not going to permit that. So unless they're totally wiped from the face of the earth or they get wrapped into this coming universal religion, you have to have Babylon in place to make that happen. So that's a stumbling block that not that forces aren't working on it, but we have to recognize the major events. And so I think we might be in that fig tree generation. I think we might be seeing the start of it, but there's a lot of things yet that need to be accounted for. And
All right.
when we look at what that means, is that this is the coming destruction by fire that was prevented from before. So how does this connect back into Nimrod? Well, as you mentioned earlier, Daniel, he is an archetypical Antichrist figure who imposes the Babel religion, which is the source word for Babylon, and the mystery religion recorded in Revelation 17 that the woman rides the beast of empires from. So when we look at Nimrod, that's an Antichrist-like figure with a Babylon source religion after the flood from a Christian perspective and a Jewish perspective, and that he is wanting to go into heaven, perhaps, a speculation based on a technology there, and kill God if he gets out of line. While Antichrist in Daniel 8:10 actually goes into heaven in the end time at the midpoint of the last 7 years, throws some of the starry host down on the earth and tramples them. And this is the same time frame for the war in heaven that's talked about after Antichrist comes to power in Revelation 12. And so we see an analogy there that we can learn from to help us kind of understand the days of Noah, which is 350 years after the flood and 600 years before the flood. We need to understand both. That also included Sodom and Gomorrah in that allegory in the Luke account, which was a destruction by fire. So you have the water destruction that was prevented, so the fire couldn't come, and then you have the Sodom and Gomorrah like destruction by fire, which is the transition allegory for the end time, as Second Peter talks about this destruction by fire being reserved for the end time. And we've got the technology now that we're doing it, and maybe we're just catching up to that technology that they had before the flood. But there's a lot of things yet to happen before this can come about. The seventh empire has to rise, and it's going to be subservient to the Babylon religion because the woman rides the reins of the beast empire in Revelation 17. And so much so, they're going to grow jealous of her and then hand their power over to a rising Antichrist who's going to destroy Babylon and then set up a new religion, as Daniel 11 talks about, with the mark of the beast system in the last 3.5 years. So we have to look for this rising empire out of the last Roman Empire of some sort of relationship to it. And Babylon will sit on 7 hills, likely the 7 Palatine hills. And Babylon, as it's defined in the New Testament for the religion and the city that Peter says he's writing from, was a code or an allegory for Rome. So we might want to look for this polytheist religion being centered in Rome on the original 7 hills of Romulus and Remus, who are giants, offspring of Ares, or Mars, as it would be in the Latin pantheon. So we have that type of thing yet to happen. And so what's interesting, though, as we take this back into nothing is new under the sun, there are 10 toes in the metallic empire prophecy of Daniel 2.
Yeah.
They are described as 10 horns and 10 kings in Daniel 7.
Yeah.
They are described as kings and horns in Revelation 12, in Revelation 13, and Revelation 17. So your imagery is the same. Short story on it, but the imagery is essentially the same. They have to rise yet. So these are 10 emperors or 10 kings of the world. So this is a significant geopolitical shift that's probably has to come about through catastrophes and wars to bring it about. We might start seeing it start to take age with people like Trump talking about the golden age and a larger expanded economic and military group of nations similar to the EEC, which probably will split down the road. You see Russia maybe formulating that. You're starting to see Xi with dynastic and empire ambitions, but that's going to take some time. And what's interesting, though, is now when we look at two analogies from prehistory, one being a subcontinent of India and another being Greek, we have an analogy in the first time in the Golden Age, as Trump is talking about. And it's the Atlantean tradition recorded in a number of accounts, but best in Timaeus and Critias by Plato. And there was a 10-king empire of Atlantis that was destroyed by the flood.
Yeah.
And because the giants became evil, it's the same. It's the same basic story, only in more detail, as being talked about in Genesis 6 and the flood story. And so there's 10 kings of Atlantis that ruled before the flood that were trying to create a world government with this Enochian black mysticism of the antediluvian epoch. So there may have been an Antichrist figure that was maybe named Atlas or Orion in that tradition, because nothing is new under the sun. They're always trying to bring this about. In the subcontinent of India, you have a tradition of an Antichrist type figure named King Sudas, who's an Indo-Aryan before the flood. Indo-Aryans are both before and after the flood, as we look at the historical datings for each. He's fighting against 10 kings in a war that's talked about before the flood. And he became the first universal monarch in that tradition of the Vedas, and set up a universal religion and set up the wheel worship that's still used today with the 8 Sabbaths based on the 4 points of the solstice and the equinox, and then one every 6 weeks. That's still used today in the wheel cycle and the wheel imagery of mysticism. And so you have these scenarios that are recorded around the world that of what happened before, which will be similar to what will be happening again. So yes, we will have somehow, some way, an influence of the giants, because it's going to have to be the same. And it's interesting in the book of Revelation where you have the kings and the merchants and the mighty ones. The terms there are talking about the bloodlines, and they're talking about words that are translated out of Greek from megas and megastranes, which goes back to Indo-Aryan meg, and these are all descriptions for tall, large giants. And so it's interesting that those are the words that are used into Greek, and that matches up with the mighty ones as they're talked about in Joel 1 and 2 and 3, and also in Ezekiel 39 after the Gog War. And so that doesn't say giant when it says mighty ones, but it says Gibor, which is often used to describe giants in the Old Testament in Hebrew. Not every time, like it's used 155 times, not every time is it used to describe a giant, because it has a few other nuanced meanings to it. But lots of times it's describing giants or powerful warriors and champions that are giant-like. So there's some connections there. It's unfortunate we don't have Hebrew in the New Testament so that we can take the direct words and match them up. So we have to take sort of cognate sort of versions. But these beast empires come from the bloodlines of these dynastic giant kingdoms. And it's just an extension thereof. So are we in the fig tree generation? I think we are, but there's a lot of things yet to come about. And I encourage Christians not to get ahead of the details of the chronology that Jesus laid down. And that he used the word then, and it's used in all 3 gospels on this. And that's the Greek word toda, means exactly that. And then you get the abomination in the middle for the timetable, and then referencing all of the prophecies in Daniel to get that understanding and that timing right. And you can overlay starting in Revelation 6 through Revelation 14 to about 7 or 8 over the first 3.5 years on Jesus's chronology. And then you have a summary in Revelation 14 of the last 3.5 year events, and then you get the details of that summary thereafter. So you can overlay what Jesus talked about in Revelation onto his chronology, and it ought to be that way. To put all prophecy around what Jesus said, not vice versa, and you get rid of the conflicts. So the testimony of Jesus was given in a vision to the angel to show John. That's the description of the Revelation as it's being presented in chapter 1. So it has to be fitting perfectly with what Jesus said in his chronology.
Yeah. That's a lot to think about, but it is like food. You know, it's like you have to eat and bite it and think about it and dig into it. Willem, I want to give you time to respond to this as well. Just something that came to my head is I heard discussions on this as well, that some people would say, well, those 10 toes already came, right? They might not have, they might have, but after Rome fell, the European nations like the Visigoths, the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Burgundians, the Lombards. Anyway, you go on, and then they also said that 3 of them kind of killed off, and so it might be them. And they look at the United Nations and how maybe the Antichrist is going to come from them, from Europe, right? And how a lot of the things in Babel was moved to Germany. Actually, if you look at the gates there as well, there's probably a lot to talk about that. But the question is, these people who believe that they are from the Nephilim, if they really are or not, doesn't really matter. If they believe so, that does matter, right? Who are they today? If we look at the world, and why is this important? Over 6,000 years ago, there was a forgotten world with ancient cities like Nippur and Eridu, where men lived for centuries and great heroes ruled, but an evil darkness was spreading. In this world, we follow the story of Uldaco, born a slave under an evil kingdom built on power, fear, and lies. But he knew only suffering. Nothing of the mysterious world of beasts, dragons, gods, and clans beyond his chains. But his story would uncover something far greater, a hidden lineage. Descendants of Adam and Seth, guarding a truth the world was losing. Because behind human history there is another war. Fallen beings, Nephilim, and a plan to corrupt everything. But at the center of it all, an ancient prophecy. The coming of a chosen one who would bring light into darkness. Lightborn, dawn of darkness. Pre-order right now and step into the beginning. The question is, these people who believe that they are from the Nephilim, if they really are or not, doesn't really matter. If they believe so, that does matter, right? Who are they today? If we look at the world, and why is this important? And how does this connect to the end times and what they are actually trying to do and to control humans and to bring forth the Antichrist?
I can just mention that I believe that we'll see a project similar to that of the Tower of Babel in the end of days. Not exactly, obviously, but with the same motive. In those days, it was to reincarnate these gods and to father the Nephilim. And I believe we'll see something similar in the end of days in some form or other. In my way of reading biblical prophecies, I believe that the European Union will play a very important role in that. And I believe that there are certain Nephilim bloodlines. Among the different Nephilim bloodlines, there are certain ones that are recognized as messianic lines. Now, at the time of the Tower of Babel, Gilgamesh was actually a messianic figure. He was most likely born towards the end of that period. We don't have the time now for me to give a detailed description, but the shining face that he had and many things shows us that he was definitely a messianic figure. And in the same way, I believe that in the end of days, we'll see a messianic figure arise, and he will be from the messianic bloodline of the Nephilim. And so I believe that this is what we can expect in future.
Yeah, so I would say yes, that there are Nephilim or Rephaim genealogical bloodlines that are in place. They like to call it the Dragon Messiah, or the Elven bloodline of the Tuatha De Danann, which are part of the Scythians and group of all the Indo-Aryans. They believe that whether or not they'll get their way and present their possible Antichrist figures in the time or not, we'll have to wait and see. But they would certainly plan to present their own bloodline Messiah figures that would have pedigrees going back to the giants and back to deceive Israel. Would have to have a scioning in of Davidic bloodlines or some sort of Israelite or Judaic bloodlines to even sort of pull that off to deceive the Israelites. So,
All right.
so that's kind of an important sort of aspect to keep in mind. Now, when we look at how we read the Bible, I like to make sure we read the Bible in a way that's literal and that we're not reimagining what it says. So there's lots of different views on end time chronology, saying the 10 kings, though, ruled at different times, as one of those approaches talks about, is kind of in contradiction with what it talks about in Daniel, that this is an end time empire and that they're going to rise in the end time together to rule in Daniel, and Antichrist will be the little horn that rises in between. So they're all there, and he overthrows 3 of them at that time, and he establishes his new 8th empire. And in Revelation 17, those 10 kings hand their power over to Antichrist. So what I caution people in terms of reimagining things to fit preconceived conclusions is don't go to the step of turning the Bible into a pretzel, because it's not going to hold up over time. It has to be consistent, and the Bible's not going to conflict itself. So, and put everything around the chronology, what Jesus said, both in the 3 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then, as I say, overlay Revelation onto what Jesus said using that chronology, and then overlay all of the other prophets in it. New Testament, Old Testament, you will not have a conflict then.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Willem. We have run out of time. I would have liked to discuss some more of those Nephilim lines as well in today and the different secret societies, but we got to end it here. Maybe we'll do another one if you guys are up to it. But thank you so much for the viewers. If you have any questions, add it in the comment sections down below. Get their books in the video description down below. I've read them. It's awesome. There's a lot of things that's discussed in it. All right. Now, before you go, always remember, life is short, so please do not waste yours. And remember to subscribe. Cheers, guys.